So the man synonymous with multi-party democracy is no more. Kenneth Matiba died last evening at Karen Hospital, aged 85 years old. But who was the man who is revered locally and internationally? Rita Tinina explains.
When Kenya's political history is written, Kenneth Stanley Njindo Matiba will take a prominent slot as a reformer, a second liberation hero, and one who paid a heavy personal price for that struggle, his health. Born in Murang'a in 1932 to Stanley Njindo and Susan Wanjiko, he attained his early childhood education at the Kahuhia School in Murang'a before joining the Alliance High School. He later gained admission into Makerere University, where he graduated with a degree in history, geography, and sociology. He landed his first job as a teacher at the Kangaroo High School in 1960, and a year later bid farewell to bachelorhood, tying the knot with Edith Wanjiro. The two had met when Matiba was at Alliance High School and Edith was at the African Girls High School, now Alliance Girls, before they both proceeded to Makerere University. He was promoted to higher education officer in 1961. But his career in the civil service would get a big boost when in 1963 he was appointed by colonial governor Malcolm MacDonald as the first African permanent secretary for education at only 31 years of age, a record at the time. After independence, Matiba was appointed permanent secretary for commerce by Jomo Kenyatta and later served in various ministries including industry and cooperatives and home affairs. In 1969, he left the civil service to become the general manager of Kenya Breweries. 4 years later, he jumped into the fray of Kenya's football politics, becoming the chairman of the Kenya Football Federation, a position he held until 1978. A year later, he changed gears and joined national politics. In the 1979 elections, he won the Mbiri parliamentary seat, now Kiharu constituency. He recaptured the seat in the subsequent 1983 and 1988 elections under the one-party rule, during which time he was appointed to head the Ministry of Culture and Social Services and later held the health and transport dockets under the Daniel Moi presidency. But it was the years that followed that thrust Matiba international and eventually international limelight. In 1988, Matiba fell out with Daniel Moi over the conduct of KANU leadership elections. He resigned from his ministerial post in December 1998 and was expelled from the ruling party KANU. He opened a new chapter in his political life. In early 1990, Matiba joined a crop of bold politicians, including Charles Rubia, who was spearheading the clamor for amendments to the Constitution to allow for the reintroduction of a multi-party system amid fierce opposition by the KANU regime. Matiba and Rubia on the 6th of June 1990 announced their intentions to convene a multi-party rally in Nairobi on the 7th of July. A day that continued to hold a special place in the country's political modern history. The rally was banned by the government, and just 3 days before it was scheduled to take place, Matiba and Rubia were arrested. The law, known as the Public Security Regulations, under which they were arrested, allowed indefinite detention without charge or trial. Matiba and Rubia were held at the Committee Maximum Security Prison for close to a year. Matiba's family said he was denied medication while in detention and he subsequently suffered a stroke. But what he had spearheaded, the reintroduction of multi-party politics, would help end his stay in prison. On the 9th of June 1991, he was released from detention. He was flown to London for medical treatment over the stroke he had suffered behind bars. While he was away for treatment, 6 opposition leaders, including Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, formed the Forum for the Restoration of Democracy, FORD, in August 1991. It was, however, outlawed by the government, but was registered 4 months later following international pressure. As the multi-party wave hit the country, Matiba returned home on the 2nd of May 1992 after an 11-month stay in London. to a hero's reception that must have convinced him to set his eyes on bigger things.
I recovered from that sickness. If it had not been for you, I would have died a long time ago because I was very, very sick.
He joined Ford, but this massive opposition grouping soon split into two after the leaders failed to agree on the method for nominating a presidential candidate. Jaramogi Oginga Odinga's faction was renamed Ford Kenya, while Matiba took up the other half of the outfit that was now called Ford Asili.
I would like to tell you that I am going to stand as a candidate for the presidency of this country.
He became Ford Asili's presidential flag bearer in the country's first multi-party elections in 1992. His bid saw a controversial promise to kick Kenyans of Indian origin out of the country. But he would only manage a second-place finish after Daniel Moi. He, however, recaptured the Kiharu parliamentary seat, but refused to recognize Moi's victory. Matiba sought redress in court, where he filed the country's first-ever presidential election petition. The Matiba versus Moi case was dismissed by Justice Riaga Amolo, forcing Matiba to settle for leader of official opposition, a title he held until the 1997 general election. Matiba refused to take part in the 1997 polls, citing what he saw as the lack of a free electoral process, and publicly banned his voter's card.
I will not support anything to do with that election. No. And I'm asking all the people of Kenya to do the same.
He later re-registered as a voter and formed Saba Saba Asili, which never made any meaningful impact. In 2000, he told the story of his life when he launched his autobiography, Aiming High, The Story of My Life. The squash player kept off the political scene in the 2002 elections, which saw the National Rainbow Coalition, with Mwai Kibaki as its flag bearer, dislodge KANU from power. The once robust politician who climbed Mount Kenya faded from the public limelight as he battled ill health, believed to have been triggered by his detention. But he tried to make what would turn out to be a feeble comeback in the race for State House in the infamous 2007 elections. Vying on a Saba Saba Asili ticket, he was among 9 candidates who sought to replace Mwai Kibaki at the famous address. He garnered a paltry 8,046 votes, 0.08% of the votes. The father of 5, who founded the Kenatco Transport Company, established himself as a prominent businessman with interest in the hospitality industry, private schools, real estate, and horticulture. He also founded the People newspaper, which was in the 90s considered a bold newspaper critical of the government. But his fortunes dwindled in the later years of his life. He was forced to fight for control of his hotel, business, and school over claims of an outstanding debt. Matiba made a public appearance in Murang'a in May 2016 during the opening of the Kenneth Matiba Eye and Dental Hospital. The hospital named in honor of the man who will go down in history as a trailblazer in independent Kenya and fierce fighter for the country's second liberation, who never enjoyed the true fruits of that struggle. Rita Tinina, KTN News.
And, well, we are looking at the life and times of that particular leader, Kenneth Matiba, who died yesterday evening. And as I had told you earlier, that I will have Dr. Duncan Ojwang of African Nazarene University, a governance expert, Sheila Maonga, with me, basically just to reflect on that, and we'll do that. But first of all, allow me to start with a phone call to Wanyiri Kihoro, who is a former Nyeri Town Member of Parliament, and And thank you for joining us this morning, Mr. Kihoro. Maybe just to start with possibly what you remember, what stands out for you when somebody speaks of that name, Kenneth Matiba?
Good morning. I remember a very dynamic Kenyan, a Kenyan who lived to his words, a Kenyan who aimed high, and his story about good things, high things for Kenya, respect for all the Kenyan people, and that is what I would want to remember Matiba about. And I also got a bit to share about him, having been detained in 1990, and it is just a year after I was released from detention in 1989.
Right, and obviously the reason why he has been eulogized so wonderfully by many leaders is his role in the democracy that Kenya now enjoys. What are your thoughts, and what do you remember about his particular role as an individual that he has played in ensuring that Kenya is where we are today, democracy-wise?
Yes, that is a good question, because I remember the 4th of July, 1990, when he had visited the office of Paul Muite, and he was accompanied by Charles Rubia. Myself, I went there with my very good friend John Haminwa, who is an advocate, and myself, I was working with him in Jubilee House. We had gone there because Matiba was insisting on having the meeting which he called for the 7th of July. And that is the day he could not even be allowed to have the meeting together with Charles Rubia, the 7th of July, Sabasaba. And he was very insistent, but the only way Matiba could be stopped, having aimed at having the first Sabasaba meeting, was by detaining him. So actually, by the time 7th of July came along, Matiba had been detained 2 days before. And that is how I remember him. Very persistent, focused man, a man who will not compromise on the truth. And if only Kenyans focused and listened to its prophets, it would be less trouble than it is today.
All right. And do you think that Kenya is where he possibly would have envisaged in terms of democracy when we look at where we are today?
I think in many ways I would say that Matiba has died a disappointed man. I remember when he suffered his second round of stroke again in London in 1990. I'd visited him and his family in Eastgate, and that evening with my late wife, we left home only to be told at about 2 a.m. in the morning that day that Matiba unfortunately had been taken sick and he had been taken into hospital. So I would say that Matiba is not a very happy man in respect of where Kenya is today. And he has written a lot. He's a man that I also remember for doing very many things in his life, being very active. The world is not just about the stomach. The world is about the head also. So I remember he wrote this book called Aiming High, the story of his life. And he had also written another book called Time for Change. Wakati wa mageuzi umefika. Kenya, a mess that must go. So if you ask me how Matiba has fared into the next world, I say he's not a happy man with Kenya that has ended up in a bigger mess than what he had seen when he was writing that book.
Okay, and maybe just to define and make it clear, when he was talking about a mess that must go, what possibly was the mess he was talking about? You've just mentioned that he probably has died disappointed by virtue of the fact that the mess is even worse. What mess exactly do you think he was referring to?
The mess is most importantly economic. Myself, maybe 20, 25 years younger than Matiba, I've seen Kenya decline. Imagine a man like Matiba, how he had seen Kenya as if it held great promise when he went to Alliance in 1951. And how Kenyans, then there were only about 3-4 million Kenyans. Look at Kenyans today, 50 million. Look at the kind of poverty levels, the failure we have had economically in terms of resolving such important issues in this country that our people are becoming impoverished. The majority of Kenyans are becoming impoverished. You can see the kind of things we try to do about the tourism. Just look at the state of tourism today. So I would say the issues that would make Matiba very disappointed about Kenya today are essentially economic and interpeople relations, tribalism. some of the worst that you can have in any country. Look at other countries that have embarked on such courses. And then you can know how disappointed Matiba is. When he had seen Kenya United, when he went to Alliance, he must have found in Alliance High School Kenyans who came from all the horns of Kenya, 5 horns of Kenya. And look at what it has become today. Just look even at, the kind of things that have come up in this country. They are not fit to have come 50 years after independence. They are things that should have belonged to the colonial period. So the most disappointing aspect that Matiba would have on his mind before he died is the economic deprivation, the inability of this country to rise to higher heights in terms of economic empowerment of our people. I think that would be his biggest disappointment.
All right. He also had a different and another way of doing things. And one of the things that stands out of Matiba, especially in his younger days, he was one of the youngest members of parliament. He was the first one to put out a presidential petition against Daniel Arap Moi. What do you remember about his brilliance and also his ability or his entrepreneurship? Because he certainly at some point was doing very, very well economically.
Thank you. You're asking good questions to me, and I'm also happy on this side of the line. I can tell you that I also got the book of Matiba in front of me called Aiming High, and he is somebody who has left something we can refer to him. When he can't speak, he has left a book to speak for him. And I would say that the kind of things that he aimed for, you can see very clearly they are in tourism, growing of flowers. Kenya now has become a leading flower exporter, important foreign exchange earner for our country. His life, I can remember at Tusker, his love for sports and Harambee Stars, and how he loved also education. One of his most important business partners when he left, after he left Alliance, he became a PS at age 31, and that is actually what happened, that he became a permanent secretary at age 31. That was in 1964. And also how even in the cabinet, he never sat on his laurels, how he was a dynamic member of parliament for Kiharu in Murang'a County, and how eventually he did not settle down, having scaled the heights, become a powerful cabinet minister in 1979. How he was not satisfied, and he rose up to the challenge very few Kenyans today in leadership want to rise up to. Like it has become that it's all about big money, and that could all be the only thinking they usually have on their mind. Not a legacy like Matiba has left of being involved in all these things and writing about it. And we are going to have his memories with us for a long, long time. He many times challenged the status quo in terms of one-party state, Saba, and the need for a working, thriving multi-party system in this country.
All right, and before we let you go, Honorable Kehoro, I don't know if you had managed to interact with Matiba on a social level, because the Matiba we know is one, of course, who was fighting for democracy, is one who was very tenacious when it came to his business. He was a shrewd businessman, as it were. But I'm sure he also had a social side, and maybe if you had interacted with him on that level, what kind of a man was he?
I think he was a very sociable man. He was a very approachable man. And as I've already said, that when he fell sick a second time, I and my late wife, we had visited him in London, and we were in his house when he was taken sick just a few hours later. I saw him in hospital many times over, London Bridge Hospital. I saw him in King's Cross Hospital. And I would say that very sociable. When in 2006 I went to Mombasa to the Africana Sea Lodge, I went to see him in his house built by the sea. And I would say he was a man whom we were comfortable to sit with, to talk to. He was an older brother, and he is somebody who, even after achieving so much in all these areas of human endeavor, he never became indoctrinated or brainwashed or somebody was not accessible to ordinary Kenyans.
All right, thank you very much, Honorable Wanjiru Kihoro, for joining us this morning and just basically giving us your understanding and how you know Honorable, the late Kenneth Matiba. Thank you very much, sir. All right, and well, in studio, like I mentioned earlier on, we do have Sheila Maonga, who's a governance expert, and Dr. Duncan Ojwang, and we're going to be weighing in on also just seeing what you remember of Kenneth Matiba, but more also to look further into that is possibly the milestones that he and other leaders have given us as a country, and possibly what they envisaged when they were fighting for democracy. But I want us to take a short break at 29 minutes after 7, and when we come back, let us continue looking at the life and times of Honorable, or rather the late Honorable Kenneth Matiba.